Let's go Dolphins. Things are heating up behind the scenes with the Miami Dolphins, and we need to talk about something that could become very important for this team. We all know quarterback is one of the most important positions in football, and man, the Dolphins simply cannot afford to get this wrong. I really want to see Miami in the Super Bowl. That is the dream, and why not believe it could happen this year? A lot of Dolphins fans believe Malik Willis is ready to carry this responsibility, but after what Miami showed behind him on Friday night, there are serious questions about what happens if Willis gets hurt. Quinn Ewers is banged up and has struggled. Cam Miller has not inspired much confidence. And now there are some very interesting quarterbacks around the NFL that Miami could potentially target. So I want to know which side you are on. Do you trust the quarterback room the way it is right now? Or do you think the Dolphins need to bring in another quarterback immediately? And if you have been a Miami Dolphins fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. Now, let's talk about Malik Willis and why Miami may already need to start looking for another option behind him. Let's start with Jonnu Smith, because this is suddenly becoming a very interesting situation for Miami. According to Josh Moser, Smith wants to come back to the Dolphins. He is living in Miami, he is training in Miami, and there is interest from his side in returning. The problem appears to be the money. Miami and Smith are not there financially right now, and Smith also wants an opportunity to compete. That immediately creates a big question for the Dolphins. Should they actually bring him back? There is no question that Smith's 2024 season in Miami gives fans a reason to think about it. He had the best season of his career playing in Mike McDaniel's offense. Smith finished that year with 884 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, and a career high in receptions, eventually earning a Pro Bowl spot as a replacement. That was not some small contribution. Smith became an important part of Miami's passing game, and his production showed that the Dolphins had found a way to use his strengths. Then everything changed. Smith wanted more money, and he eventually became part of the trade involving Jalen Ramsey, with Minkah Fitzpatrick coming to Miami. After leaving the Dolphins, Smith's production fell dramatically. His receptions dropped by more than 50%. His receiving yards dropped by roughly 75%. His touchdowns also fell sharply, and even his average yards per catch nearly got cut in half. When you compare those two seasons, it is natural to wonder what happened. Was Miami's system simply a perfect fit for him? Was it the way he was being used? Or did Smith experience a real decline as a player? Whatever the answer is, his success with the Dolphins in 2024 is the main reason a reunion sounds attractive. We have already seen him produce in this offense. We are not talking about Miami trying to guess whether he could work here. We have evidence that he did work here, but that does not automatically mean bringing him back is the right move. Miami has already invested in its tight end room, including young players who need opportunities to develop, while Greg Dulcich is also part of the picture. Nobody needs to pretend that the Dolphins have an elite, dominant tight end group right now. That is not the argument. The question is whether Smith would improve this roster enough to justify taking snaps away from younger players and using money that could be spent somewhere else. That second part is extremely important. Miami has other needs. The secondary is one area that could use attention. The offensive line is another, especially with Jamari Salyer's injury. Wide receiver could also become a position worth watching depending on what the Dolphins believe they are getting from veterans, such as Tutu Atwell and Jalen Tolbert. Miami likes what some of its younger receivers can potentially become, but the veterans still have something to prove. And then we get to quarterback, which might be the biggest reason Miami should think carefully before spending additional money at tight end. The Dolphins have around $16 million in space for this season, according to the information being discussed. And if they're going to use that money, there are reasonable arguments that it should go somewhere other than tight end. There's another issue with Smith as well, blocking. If Miami is bringing him back mainly because he can offer more as a receiving tight end, the Dolphins still have to consider what he gives them in the running game. Smith has never been known as a strong blocker, and his run-blocking grades have been in the low 40s in each of the last 3 seasons. So while the reunion sounds exciting, because everyone remembers what happened in 2024, the actual fit is more complicated. If Smith were willing to return for the veteran minimum, then the conversation becomes much more interesting. At that price, Miami would be taking very little financial risk on a player who has already shown he can produce in this offense. But would Smith accept that? We simply do not know. And even with the report that he wants to return, it would still be surprising to see Miami actually make the signing unless the financial side makes a lot of sense for the Dolphins. Now let's move to the quarterback situation, because this is where Miami may have a much bigger decision coming. After what the Dolphins showed behind Malik Willis on Friday night, it is difficult to look at this roster and say Miami should simply do nothing. Quinn Ewers is banged up and has struggled, and Cam Miller has not provided much confidence either. That creates a real problem. Some fans might say that if Malik Willis gets hurt, the season is probably in trouble anyway. So why spend resources on another quarterback? Just accept it and move forward. I understand that argument, but there is another side to it. This roster has players Miami is trying to develop. That includes young wide receivers like Caleb Douglas, Chris Bell, and Kevin Coleman Jr. Those players need somebody capable of getting them the football. If your quarterback situation completely falls apart, you are not only hurting your chances of winning games, you are making it harder to evaluate and develop everybody around the quarterback. That is why adding another quarterback makes sense. And one of the most fascinating names to watch is J.J. McCarthy.
McCarthy was a top 15 pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, but his NFL career has not gone according to plan. He lost his rookie season to injury, and when he eventually got his opportunity, things did not go well. His struggles became even more noticeable because Sam Darnold went on to have major success after leaving Minnesota. Now McCarthy's situation with the Vikings looks uncertain. He has struggled with accuracy, turnovers, and decision-making. An anonymous NFL general manager reportedly believes McCarthy might not even be on Minnesota's roster by this time next year. There is still a reason teams could be interested in him, though. The physical ability is there. When you watch McCarthy's best plays, you can see the arm talent that made him such a highly drafted quarterback. He can absolutely throw the football. The problem is everything that needs to happen around that arm talent. His footwork needs improvement. His processing needs improvement. His decision-making needs improvement. He also needs to become better at changing the trajectory and touch on his throws instead of depending so heavily on his arm. That makes him a developmental project. And maybe that is exactly how Miami should view him. If the price were a 7th-round pick, taking a chance on McCarthy would make sense. You would not be bringing him to Miami expecting him to immediately take Malik Willis's job. You would be bringing in a talented young quarterback and trying to rebuild his confidence and develop the parts of his game that have held him back. There is even a comparison sitting right in front of Miami. Green Bay once traded for Malik Willis after Willis could not get things going in Tennessee. Willis had talent, but his first NFL situation did not work. Green Bay brought him into a different environment, developed him and turned him into a capable backup. McCarthy